Imagine being trapped in a burning house, not only fighting the fire around you, but also the internal fire of guilt and pain that has burned for years. John Harris, a veteran firefighter, has always blamed himself for the death of his daughter, Emma. But what happens when, during a devastating fire, he is transported to a burning old church, where he finds Emma waiting for him? What secrets and truths does she have to reveal? And will John be able to forgive himself and find the peace he seeks? What would you do if the only person who could free you from years of torment was someone you lost a long time ago? How will this near-death experience transform John's life and his relationship with his own family? If you're curious about how forgiveness, love, and redemption can emerge in the most unlikely circumstances, then this story is for you. Get ready for a journey of faith, hope, and miracles. I'm Anthony Bennett and welcome to my Near-Death Experience channel. Let's listen to the story together. John Harris, a 45-year veteran firefighter, was known throughout Springfield, Illinois, for his bravery and dedication. He dedicated more than 2 decades to service, always putting the safety of others above his own. Married to Laura, a compassionate nurse, they had a daughter, Emma, who was the center of their lives. But 6 years ago, a car accident took Emma's life, leaving John a deep wound that never healed. Since then, his life has been divided between the before and the after. Emma's death transformed John from a man full of life into a shadow of his former self. He was tormented by guilt, believing that he should have done something to prevent the tragedy, even though he knew he was not present at the time of the accident. This guilt led him to emotionally distance himself from Laura, immersing himself increasingly in work as a way to escape the unbearable pain. The work that once brought him satisfaction was now a dark refuge to avoid the grief he couldn't process. Over time, John and Laura's marriage began to suffer. Laura tried to get closer to John, but he pulled away, fearing that if he admitted his emotions, they would destroy him completely. The nights were especially difficult, and John often woke up in a cold sweat, reliving the moment he received the news of Emma's death. He became increasingly introspective, withdrawing not only from Laura, but also from friends and colleagues. To others, he was a silent hero. Inside, he felt like a broken man. At work, John began taking unnecessary risks, an unconscious way of punishing himself for what happened to Emma. His colleagues noticed the changes, but no one knew how to help. They saw John as a man of steel, but behind that facade was a heart heavy with pain and regret. John threw himself into the fire, almost wishing the flames would take him away, so that he would no longer have to live with the weight of guilt. The relationship with Laura deteriorated more and more. The love that once united them seemed distant, almost unattainable. John didn't know how to talk to Laura about what he was feeling, the fear, the pain, the guilt, and at the same time, he was afraid that if he did, it would hurt her even more. So he continued to close himself off, building walls around himself, hoping to protect himself and Laura from further pain. But these walls only served to isolate him further. Laura, in turn, was fighting her own battle. She saw the man she loved disappear before her eyes, but she felt powerless to bring him back. He tried to convince him to seek help, to talk to someone, but John always refused, insisting that he was fine. She knew he wasn't, but she also knew he needed to face his demons on his own. The distance between them grew, and they both felt Emma's absence as a constant, painful presence. Despite everything, John continued his work, throwing himself more and more into missions. He believed that if he continued saving lives, he could somehow make up for the life he failed to save. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. Emma's death had turned him into a man he barely recognized, and the weight of that transformation was crushing him. He needed redemption, but he didn't know how to find it. On a cold December night, John was called to respond to a fire in a 2-story house on the outskirts of the city. The flames were already high when he and his team arrived, and the situation seemed desperate. Neighbors were shouting that a family was trapped on the second floor, and time was crucial. Without hesitation, John was the first to volunteer to enter the house, determined to save whoever was inside. He knew that every second counted, and he couldn't waste time. As John approached the burning house, he felt the intense heat of the flames and the pressure of the situation. His colleagues followed him, but everyone knew that John was taking charge, as he always did in extreme situations. He could barely think of anything other than getting to the second floor and getting people out. The training and experience kept him focused, but at the same time, there was something different that night, something he couldn't explain. John entered the house with full force, ignoring the growing heat and the thick smoke that was already starting to make breathing difficult. The screams of his colleagues were left behind as he advanced through the burning rooms. He knew he had to be quick, that there was no time to waste. But as he climbed the stairs, a dark foreboding came over him. Something wasn't right, and a part of his mind began to question why he was here, risking everything once again. Upon reaching the second floor, John heard muffled screams coming from one of the bedrooms. He ran to the door, which was locked, and knocked it down with force. Inside, he found a mother and two young children, huddled in the corner, surrounded by the fire. Wasting no time, he picked them up in his arms and began carrying them out one at a time. Every second felt like an eternity as he fought to get them out safely. Finally, with the last child in his arms, John ran back to the exit. As he was going down the stairs, an explosion shook the house. The ground gave way beneath his feet, and he fell along with the child he was carrying. The pain was immediate and paralyzing, but John forced himself to continue, crawling towards the exit door. He managed to pass the child to one of his colleagues, who helped him out of the house. The fire was now completely out of control, and the house began to collapse. John barely had time to get out before the ceiling collapsed, burying everything inside. John was taken to an ambulance, where paramedics began treating him. He was exhausted, bruised, and covered in soot, but relieved that he had managed to save his family. However, as he lay on the stretcher, he felt a strange sense of discomfort. His thoughts began to fluctuate, and the reality around him seemed to unravel. He heard voices, but they seemed distant, as if they were in a tunnel. Then everything went dark. Lying on the stretcher, John began to lose consciousness. The sound of sirens and voices around him became more and more distant until he found himself plunged into deep darkness. He tried to fight the feeling, but it was like he was being pulled to a place where there was no control, where there was no turning back. Within seconds, John realized he was no longer in the world he knew. The darkness around him was complete, but there was something more, something he couldn't see but could feel. John tried to move, but his body wouldn't respond. He felt a presence nearby, a sense that he was not alone. The air around him felt heavy, thick, and a feeling of dread began to grow within him. Then, suddenly, a distant light began to appear, faint at first, but gradually increasing in intensity. John felt an irresistible force pulling him toward that light, and he had no choice but to follow it. As it got closer, the light revealed something surprising. John was in an old church, one he recognized immediately. It was the church he attended with Laura and Emma when Emma was still little. Memories of this place flooded his mind, but the sight was disturbing. The church was on fire, as was the house he had just left. The flames were rising up the pillars and walls, but, curiously, I couldn't feel the heat. Instead, there was a feeling of waiting, as if something was about to happen. John entered the church not knowing what to expect. The wooden benches were covered in ash, and the sound of the crackling fire filled the air. At the altar, he saw a figure standing, looking at him. With his heart beating fast, John realized it was Emma. She was there, his little Emma, just as he remembered her, wearing the dress she loved. She looked at him with a look that seemed to penetrate his soul, and John felt unable to move. "Emma," he whispered, his voice cracking. The sight of his daughter there, in that surreal place, was the most profound shock he had ever experienced. He didn't know if he was dreaming, if this was real, or if he was just wrath of death. All he knew was that his daughter was before him, and the pain of her absence hit him like never before. But there was something in Emma's expression, something he couldn't quite understand. She seemed calm, almost serene, and that made him even more confused. "Why are you here?" John asked, his voice shaking. He wanted to run to her, hug her, but his feet felt stuck to the ground. Emma didn't respond right away, but kept her eyes fixed on him. Finally, she spoke, her voice clear and firm, but with a sweetness he remembered so well. "You have to listen to me, Daddy. There are things you need to know, things you never knew. And I'm here to show you." John felt a chill run down his spine when he heard those words. What did Emma mean by that? Emma continued to look at John, her face serene but her eyes reflecting a depth of emotions he couldn't decipher. "You always thought it was your fault," she began, her voice echoing through the burning church. "But it wasn't, Dad. You couldn't have done anything to change what happened to me. You blame yourself for not being there, for not protecting me, but it wasn't something you could avoid." John felt his heart sink when he heard that. These were the words he longed to hear, but never imagined would come from Emma. "But I should have done something," he protested, his voice full of pain. "I should have protected you, Emma. I am your father. That was my job." Emma stepped forward, her hands outstretched to him. "Daddy, I never blamed you," she said softly. "I always knew you did the best you could. But life is unpredictable, and we can't always control what happens. You need to forgive yourself, just like I forgave you. You can't keep living with this guilt." Emma's words pierced John's heart. He always knew, rationally, that he was not to blame for the accident, but emotionally, he was never able to free himself from this burden. Hearing this from his daughter, in such a strange and mysterious place, was almost too much for him to bear. He felt tears streaming down his face, something he rarely allowed to happen. "I miss you so much, Emma," he said, his voice breaking. "I would give anything to have you back." Emma smiled sadly, and there was a sadness in her eyes that John recognized immediately. "I know, Dad. I miss you too. But I am at peace, and you need to find your own peace. That's why I'm here. There are more things you need to know, things you never knew about what really happened. I'm here to help you understand, so you can move forward." John looked at her, confused and at the same time full of fear. What else could there be? What else didn't he know? "There's something you never knew about that day," Emma continued, her voice now a little more serious. "Something you never knew because you were too focused on your guilt to see the full picture. But I'll show you, Daddy. I'll show you what really happened." John felt his heart speed up. He always thought he knew everything about the accident, that the pain he carried was the complete truth. But now, standing before Emma, he realized that perhaps there was more, much more than he had ever imagined. "Close your eyes, Daddy," Emma instructed softly. "I'm going to take you back to the day it all happened. But this time, you will see everything as it really was, not as you thought it was." John hesitated, but the confidence in Emma's voice made him follow her words. He closed his eyes, feeling a wave of emotions take over his body. "Deep down, I was terrified of what I might see, but I knew I needed to do this." He needed to know the truth, no matter what the cost. When John closed his eyes, he felt the world around him change again. The feeling of heat from the flames disappeared, and he found himself back to the day Emma died. He was there, at the scene of the accident, but this time as an invisible observer. Laura's car was overturned on the road, and Emma was trapped inside it. John saw everything with painful clarity, every detail burned into his memory forever. But there was something else, something he had never noticed before. Suddenly, he noticed a figure next to the car. It was a man, apparently in his early 30s, who approached the vehicle with a determined expression. John had never seen this man before, but there was something about him that seemed familiar. The man looked into the car, seeing Emma trapped in the back seat. He tried to open the door, but it was too dented to budge. John felt his heart race as he watched the scene unfold. "You couldn't have done anything, Daddy," Emma's voice echoed in his mind. "This man tried to help you, he tried to help me. But there was nothing he could do. And there was nothing you could have done even if you were there." Fate had already decided what would happen that day. John watched helplessly as the man continued to struggle to open the door. He finally managed to break the window and reach Emma, but when he did, it was too late. Emma was already unconscious. John saw the desperate man, trying to revive Emma, but his efforts were in vain. Tears began to stream down John's face as he watched the scene. He always believed that if he had been there, he could have done something different, he could have saved his daughter. But now, seeing the truth, he realized he was wrong. There was nothing he or anyone else could have done to change what happened. The guilt he carried for so long was based on a lie he created. "I didn't want you to live with this pain, Daddy," Emma's voice continued. "I wanted you to know the truth, for you to understand that it wasn't your fault. You always protected me the best way you could. But some things are beyond our control, and you need to accept that. You need to forgive yourself so we can both find peace." John felt like a weight was being lifted off his shoulders, but at the same time, he felt an overwhelming sadness. He realized that the man who tried to save Emma was someone he knew, a family friend who was always there, but who never spoke about what happened that day. John never knew of his friend's desperate effort to save his daughter. He had lived with the belief that he should have done something, but now he saw that even someone who was there, at that very moment, could not change destiny. The truth hit him like a brutal blow, but it also brought with it a strange sense of relief. When John opened his eyes again, he was back in the burning church, facing Emma. She looked at him with a mixture of love and compassion, hoping he would understand what he had just witnessed. "You've seen the truth now, Daddy," she said softly. "You saw it wasn't your fault. But what you do with that truth is up to you. You can choose to continue living in the past, or you can begin to heal and move forward. I will be with you regardless of your choice." John was silent, taking in everything Emma had shown him. The revelation was devastating, but at the same time, it brought a clarity he had never experienced before. The guilt he carried, the weight that had crushed him for years, now seemed less imposing. He still felt the pain of losing Emma, but for the first time, there was a small spark of hope that he could find peace. He looked at his daughter, the same girl he had always known, but who now seemed so wise, so beyond his understanding. "I don't know how to forgive myself," John said finally, his voice low and thick with emotion. "I've lived with this guilt for so long that I don't know who I am without it. But you're right, Emma. I need to try, for you, for your mother, and for myself." Emma smiled softly, and the relief John felt seeing her like that was immense. "Forgiving yourself is the first step, Daddy," she said. "But you don't have to do it alone. I'm here, and your mother is too. You can help each other." John felt the tears fall once again, but this time, they weren't just from pain. There was a feeling of relief, a release he didn't know he needed. He had never realized how trapped he was in the past, how much his suffering had defined. Now, with the truth revealed, he had the opportunity to free himself, to start living again. "I'll try," he repeated, more to himself than to Emma. "I will try to forgive myself, and maybe, one day, I can find peace." Emma nodded, pleased with her father's decision. "You've already taken the first step," she said. "And I'm so proud of you. But now, you need to go back. Your life isn't over yet, Dad. There is so much you can still do, so many people you can help, starting with yourself and Mom. You still have a life together, and it's time to start living it fully, without the weight of the past holding you back." As Emma's words echoed around him, John felt the church around him begin to disappear. The flames, which were previously burning fiercely, began to die down, and the light around him became more and more intense. He felt a feeling of lightness, as if he were being lifted, taken away from that place between life and death. But he felt no fear, just a deep sense of peace. He knew he was coming back, but this time, he was ready to face whatever came next. "I love you, Emma," he whispered, feeling his daughter's presence fade. "I love you so much, and I will do my best to honor you and Mom. I will live for the three of us." With those words, John felt the last connection to the spiritual world break, and he was pulled back to reality. When he opened his eyes, he was lying in a hospital bed, surrounded by doctors and nurses who watched him with concern. He was back, and for the first time in a long time, he felt like he had a second chance. When John opened his eyes in the hospital, he felt a wave of confusion and relief at the same time. He was alive, but the memories of what had happened on the threshold between life and death were engraved in his mind as if they were a vivid dream. Beside him, Laura sat, holding his hand tightly. She looked exhausted, but her eyes were filled with concern and love. "John," she whispered, her eyes watering. "You came back to me." He tried to smile, but his throat was dry, and the weight of what he had experienced still hung over him. Laura didn't immediately ask what had happened. She knew John would need time to process everything. Instead, she just stood by his side, offering him the silent comfort of her presence. John felt a new connection with Laura, something he hadn't felt in years. He realized that, like him, she was also struggling with her own pain, and that he had been blind to it for so long. He squeezed her hand back, promising himself that things would be different from now on. In the days that followed, John began to recover physically. But he knew that true healing would need to happen on another level, one that would require more than just rest and medicine. Emma's words echoed in his mind constantly, reminding him that he had a chance to forgive himself and build something new. He knew this wouldn't be easy, but he was determined to try. John began to talk more openly with Laura, sharing with her what he had seen and felt during his near-death experience. Laura listened attentively as John described what had happened in the burning church, his encounter with Emma, and the revelation of the truth about the accident. Tears ran down Laura's face as she listened, but there was also a deep relief in her expressions. "I always knew you were carrying this guilt, John," she said softly. "But I never knew how to help you get rid of it. Maybe now we can start to heal together." These conversations were the first step towards a new phase in John and Laura's relationship. They began to rebuild what had been lost over the years, not just as husband and wife, but as companions who were willing to face their demons together. John realized that he didn't have to carry his burden alone, that Laura was by his side and always had been, even when he couldn't see her. And for the first time, he began to allow himself to feel hope again. As John recovered, he also began to reflect on what it meant to be a firefighter, what it meant to save lives. He was still passionate about his work, but now, he understood that he couldn't use it as an escape. Instead, he needed to find a balance, learn to care for himself and his family as much as he cared for others. This realization led him to reconnect with his colleagues, talk openly about his challenges, and seek help when needed. John knew his healing journey was just beginning, but he felt prepared to face whatever came. The near-death experience changed him in ways he was still beginning to understand. But one thing was clear, he was no longer the same man who entered that burning house. He had a new perspective, a new purpose, and was determined to live the life Emma always wanted for him, a life full of love, forgiveness, and ultimately peace. As John continued his recovery, he realized there was still more work to be done, especially when it came to his relationships. He spent years emotionally separated from Laura, and now he knew he needed to regain what he had lost. The conversations they had at the hospital were just the beginning. Back home, he began taking concrete steps to strengthen his marriage, making a point of being present, listening, and sharing his feelings. John also began to repair the relationships he had neglected with his friends and coworkers. He realized that for years he isolated himself from everyone, preferring to carry his burden alone. Now, he was willing to change that. He started opening up more to his closest friends, allowing himself to be vulnerable and talk about his struggles. To his surprise, he found support and understanding, something he never imagined he would receive. This helped him realize that he was not alone, and that there were people around him willing to help him. At work, John began to take a different approach. He was still a strong leader, but he now understood the importance of taking care of himself so he could take care of others. He started delegating more, trusting his coworkers, and recognizing when he needed a break. This change did not go unnoticed, and many of his colleagues began to see John as a source of inspiration, someone who had been through a terrible ordeal and come out the other side stronger and wiser. Laura noticed the changes in John and, little by little, began to lower her own defenses. She was also hurt by Emma's death and John's emotional departure, but now, she saw a new opportunity to rebuild their relationship. They started doing things together that they hadn't done in years: walks, quiet dinners at home, and long conversations about everything and nothing. The flame that seemed to have gone out between them began to shine again, stronger and longer lasting. John and Laura also started talking more about Emma, something they had both avoided for so long. They realized that by keeping Emma alive in their memories and in their conversations, they were honoring the life she had, rather than focusing only on the tragedy of her death. This brought a new layer of healing to both of them, allowing them to remember Emma with love and joy rather than just sadness and loss. These moments of reconnection also brought new challenges. There was still a lot of pain to face, a lot of difficult conversations to have. But this time, John was committed to not running away anymore. He knew the road ahead would be long and, at times, painful, but he was determined to move forward, to live fully, with the support of Laura and everyone around him. As John continued his healing journey, he realized that the forgiveness Emma had talked about wasn't just about forgiving himself. It was about forgiving life for its unpredictability, for its ups and downs. It was about accepting that while he couldn't control everything, he could control how he chose to react. And with that, John began to find a peace he thought he would never feel again. As the months passed, John began to feel a peace that had been absent from his life for a long time. The journey he began after his near-death experience led him to rediscover parts of himself that he thought were lost forever. He reconnected with his own emotions, his faith, and the people around him. The guilt he had carried for so long began to dissipate, giving way to a calm acceptance of what happened and what happened. That he couldn't change. John also began to understand that peace was not a permanent state, but something he needed to cultivate daily. He developed a new routine that included moments of reflection, meditation, and gratitude. He began to appreciate the little things in life: the sunrise, a hot cup of coffee in the morning, Laura's smile. These little things, which previously went unnoticed, now brought him a joy he thought he had lost. On the job, John became a mentor to younger firefighters. He started sharing his experiences, not just the good ones but the difficult ones as well. He talked about the importance of taking care of his mental health, something he had neglected for so long. John knew that by sharing his story he could help others avoid the mistakes he made. This gave him a new purpose, a sense of mission that went beyond putting out fires and saving lives. Laura also noticed the changes in John and felt that they were finally starting a new phase in their lives. They began to make plans for the future, something they hadn't done since Emma's death. They talked about traveling, maybe adopting a child or getting involved in volunteer work. The idea of building something new together brought a renewed sense of hope and purpose to both of them. Meanwhile, Emma's memory continued to be a constant and beloved presence in their lives, but in a way that now brought comfort rather than pain. John and Laura began creating traditions to honor Emma, like lighting a candle on her birthday or visiting the places she loved. These small tributes helped keep Emma alive in their hearts, but also allowed them to move forward without the crushing weight of sadness. John also allowed himself to feel proud of the man he was becoming. He knew he wasn't perfect and there was still a lot of work to be done, but he was at peace with that. He understood that life was a continuous journey of learning and growth, and that each day brought new opportunities to be better. This acceptance of himself, with all his flaws and strengths, was one of the greatest gifts the near-death experience brought him. Over time, John began to realize that despite everything he had lost, there was still much to gain. He began to see life as a precious gift, something to be lived fully, with courage, love and gratitude. And with this new perspective, he was ready to embrace whatever came next, knowing that whatever the challenge, he was no longer alone. John's near-death experience was a turning point in his life. She not only forced him to confront his guilt and sadness, but also gave him a new chance to start over. John knew he couldn't change the past, but now he understood that he could shape his future in a way that honored Emma's memory while embracing the possibilities of a fulfilling life. He decided that this new beginning would be guided by love, forgiveness, and faith. John and Laura began planning a trip they had always dreamed of taking, but had postponed indefinitely after Emma's death. The trip represented more than just an opportunity to see new places. It was a symbol of their commitment to moving forward together. They knew there would still be difficult days, but now they were prepared to face them side by side, with lighter hearts and renewed spirits. At work, John continued to be a positive force. He began organizing support groups for firefighters where they could talk openly about the emotional and psychological challenges of the job. These meetings became a vital source of support for many, and John felt a deep sense of purpose in helping his colleagues navigate the difficulties he himself faced. He was determined to make sure no one else felt like they had to face their demons alone. John also began to explore new interests and hobbies that he had neglected for years. He started playing guitar again, something he and Emma used to do together. Music became a new form of expression for him, a way to channel his emotions in a healthy and creative way. He also began hiking with Laura, rediscovering the joy of being in nature and the simple beauty of the world around him. As John continued to rebuild his life, he realized that the peace he had found was not something that could be given or taken away by another. It was something he had achieved through hard work, reflection, and most of all, through love and forgiveness. He knew that life was uncertain and that new challenges would arise, but he was confident that whatever the future held, he was prepared to face it with courage and grace. Deep in his soul, John felt that Emma was always with him, not as a shadow of pain, but as a light guiding him forward. He knew she was at peace, and that gave him the strength he needed to live his life to the fullest. He had learned to forgive himself and, in return, found a new sense of purpose, a new reason to live and love. The fire that had once threatened to destroy him had now forged him into a stronger, more complete man. John Harris had walked through the fire, both literally and figuratively, and emerged stronger than ever. He was no longer the man tormented by the past, but someone who had found redemption and a new life. With Laura by his side and Emma in his heart, John was ready to begin this new chapter of his life with hope, love, and the peace he sought.